Welcome back, everybody. Today we are starting our first official lesson for Chapter 16. Chapter 16, Section 1, Slavery in the Territories. Now, I mentioned in the introduction video that Chapter 16 is very important because this is it. This is the lead up to the Civil War. We will end Chapter 16 with the beginning of the Civil War. So this is all of the things that push us as a country into declaring war against each other. And today we're going to start that discussion by looking at slavery in the territories. And there are really two questions that we're going to try and answer today. One, and in this time period, should slavery be allowed in these new U.S. territories? And two, what problems might arise from allowing slavery in these new territories? So should it be allowed in the territories, and what problems might arise from having slavery in the territories? And as you can see, I've also done an audio recording, so if you choose to use that, just look for the pictures of Stinky Pete and you'll find all of the audio recordings for today. But if not, let us continue with our key terms. And today we'll be talking about three major key terms. First, the Missouri Compromise, the Wilmot Proviso, and the Free Soil Party. So these are three different things that we'll be talking about today. And like always, I want to start us off with a question. In the last chapter, we learned that many Southerners didn't actually own slaves, but the economy of the South depended very heavily on slave labor. Why do you think that so many people felt so strongly about slavery? Well, what were some of the arguments that people of the South were using to justify slavery? If we think back, it was the dependence on the plantation economy, the belief that African Americans couldn't take care of themselves, yada, yada, yada. Well, all of these arguments that were being used to justify slavery, do you think that these same arguments could be used to justify slavery spreading out into new territories? Now, the West, especially the lands of the Mexico Cession and California, they really weren't suitable for the plantation economy because most of the people that settled there were poor farmers looking to start over. Without plantations, slavery really would not be necessary for the economy. You don't have wealthy planters trying to go and expand their farms. The people moving into the westward territories were poor farmers looking for a new chance and looking to start over. So plantations really didn't make sense in this area. And so our first video it's going to be of two cousins, and it's being acted out, and these are two cousins living in the South arguing why the new territories should use slave labor rather than free labor. And I want you to listen to the reasons, listen to the arguments that they give, and in particular, the final statement that the female cousin gives about the rights of slaves and the rights of the government in general. So we're going to watch this, and then we will pick up with the rest of today's discussion.
Why worry about those other states and those silly territories you keep talking about? Slave states, free states. None of it affects the little me. Who cares?
I care. The United States government cares. And you too, Serena, should bring yourself to care. More and more states and territories are accepting the ideas of free labor. When the representatives of the free states go to Congress, those northern gentlemen, they keep making laws harder and harder for our families to keep our slaves.
I cannot believe they do not accept this divine institution of slavery. As the Negro takes care of us, we must also take care of them. Life is perfect.
Not for much longer. Our good government is willing to allow for the fanatical wishes of 10 million Northerners to rule absolutely over our much smaller Southern population. Slavery, by law, could be destroyed.
It's all beginning to come clear to me now how wrongful it is that our fate be determined by others and not ourselves.
Now, in 1819, there were the same number of slave states and free states in the United States. There were 11 of each. So there was a balance in the Senate. But problems arose when Missouri applied to become a slave state. Well, because this would upset the balance and give the South more power in the Senate than the North. An argument broke out that lasted for several months over whether or not Missouri should be let in as a slave state or be forced to enter as a free state. And during that time, Maine applied to be let in the Union as a free state. And previously, Maine was actually a part of Massachusetts, so Massachusetts was kind of split into these two territories, but Maine wanted to be let in as its own state. So if it came in as a separate free state, then the balance in the Senate would stay the same. This way, Missouri could enter as a slave state, and Maine could take its place as a free state. Now, if we take a look at this map, I want us to look at it, and I want you to tell me what you see about the balance of slave states and free states geographically. So, looking at this geographically, where is Missouri and where is Maine? Now, what do you think the locations of these two areas, or these two potential states, what do you think that says about the general feelings of slavery in the United States? And can you come to any conclusions about these general feelings, given geographically where Maine is and where Missouri is? So to solve the issue, Senator Henry Clay, our good buddy, proposed to admit Missouri as a slave state and Maine as a free state. And this proposal, known as the Missouri Compromise, would keep those numbers equal. Part of Clay's compromise drew an invisible line across the southern border of Missouri, and any new states made from the Louisiana Territory north of that line would be free states, and any new states created south of that line would be slave states. And our next video is going to give us a little bit more background and help us get a better understanding of the Missouri Compromise and what went into bringing it about.
As America's new boundary lines were being drawn during the presidency of James Monroe, the nation's population reached 10 million. During this period of explosive growth, new states were being added almost every year, and the issue of slavery increasingly divided the nation. Mississippi was added to the Union in 1817 as a slave state, meaning a state in which slavery was legal. The next year, Illinois was added as a free state, meaning a state in which slavery was banned. And in 1819, Alabama was added as a slave state. At that point, the number of free and slave states was equal. However, the application by Missouri for statehood as a slave state threatened to upset this balance unless the U.S. Congress took decisive action. The leaders of the northern free states claimed Congress had the right to prohibit slavery in Missouri as well as any other new states created west of the Mississippi River. But the leaders of the southern slave states strongly resisted this notion. They feared that if the balance of power was shifted in favor of the free states, slavery might be made illegal and undermine the South's slave-based economy. In 1820, Congressman Henry Clay of Kentucky helped enact a law called the Missouri Compromise, designed to appease both sides. This law allowed Missouri to be admitted as a slave state, but it banned slavery from the entire region north of the Missouri Compromise line that corresponded to its southern boundary. It is interesting to note that while the Missouri Compromise was being worked out, voters in the state of Massachusetts decided to create a new free state from northern lands that had been a part of Massachusetts since early colonial times. so that when the state of Maine entered the Union in 1820, it balanced the influence of the new slave state of Missouri.
So, thanks to the Missouri Compromise, slavery would now be kept out of the northern part of the Louisiana Territory. But that was all well and good, but there were still more territories being brought under U.S. control. So, something needed to be done about those territories. For starters, there was the territory that we mentioned earlier, the Mexican Cession, the territory that had been gained from winning the Mexican War. What would happen to these territories? Now, many Northerners were afraid that the South would try to extend slavery into those Western territories and eventually upset the balance once again in the Senate. So a proposal was made by Congressman David Wilmot of Pennsylvania, and he came up with this plan to keep slavery out of the West. And he called for the ban of all slavery in any territories won from Mexico in the Wilmot Proviso. Southern leaders, how do you think they reacted to this? Yes, they were not pleased. They very angrily opposed him and said that Congress had no right to ban slavery in the West. But the House passed the Wilmot Proviso in 1846, but it was struck down once it got to the Senate. And during this time, the Mexican War continued, and people continued to debate the future of slavery in the Western territories. Now, it became a lot harder to remain neutral on the issue of slavery at this time. On one side, you have abolitionists who believed that slavery was morally wrong and should not exist anywhere. And what type of abolitionists were those? Correct, immediate abolitionists. Well, on the other side, on the way opposite end, were the Southern slaveholders and other Southern whites who believed that slavery should be allowed in any territory. They also believed that runaway slaves should be caught and returned to their owners because, we've said this before, they looked at slaves as property. So, for instance, if someone stole my car, I would want that car returned to me. They looked at this the same way. If a slave escaped or someone took a slave, they would want that slave back. So I want you to look at this picture of way too many kids on a seesaw and think of the two viewpoints as the two kids on the very ends of the seesaw that we're looking at. So think of the boy right here in the white shirt and the glasses. He will represent the abolitionists, and the girl all the way to the right, whose face is hidden behind another girl, will represent the slaveholders. Now, everyone in between will represent the more moderate positions. Some sided more with the abolitionists, and some sided more with the slave owners, and there were some, like the girl in the yellow shirt, who are right smack dab in the middle. Some of the moderates argued that the Missouri Compromise line pictured on this very first map, there it is, should be extended all the way to the Pacific coast, and any state that was formed north of that line should be a free state, and anything that was made south of that line would be a slave state. Now, other moderates that, if we're looking back at this picture, think of them as these little girls that are kind of on the side of the slaveholders, but still towards the middle. They supported popular sovereignty, or the rights of people living in those territories to create their own government and decide for themselves if they were going to be a free state or a slave state. Either way, the longer the debate went on for slavery, the more people jumped on and voiced their opinions. Eventually, this debate over slavery led to the creation of a brand new political party. You have some leaders from the Democrats and some leaders of the Whigs opposed slavery, but wouldn't take a stand because they were afraid of losing Southern votes within their party. Some even feared that slavery would ultimately split the nation. So in 1848, anti-slavery members from both parties, so some members from the Whigs, some members from the Democrats, came together and met in Buffalo, New York to form the Free Soil Party. And the Free Soil Party was formed to keep slavery out of the Western territories. So they wanted to keep these territories free. They weren't going to mess with slavery where it already existed, but they wanted to try and stop the spread of it. And there were only a few members of the Free Soil Party that were actual full-on abolitionists. Most just wanted to stop the expansion of slavery. And like they said, they weren't willing to go all the way to try and abolish it completely. So the first step where slavery is really becoming a political issue and a very divisive political issue is with the creation, we can see that with the creation of the Free Soil Party. In the election of 1848, the Free Soil Party chose former President Martin Van Buren as their candidate, and the Democrats chose Lewis Cass of Michigan, while the Whigs chose Zachary Taylor, the hero of the Mexican War. And for the first time, slavery was an actual issue in the election. Van Buren wanted to ban slavery in the Mexican Cession, while Cass supported popular sovereignty, the two more moderate viewpoints. Now, Taylor himself was actually a slave owner, so a lot of Southerners voted for him because they believed that he was going to be pro-slavery. But during the election, he actually kept very quiet on the issue of slavery, and as this map shows, he ended up winning the election. The map also shows us that even though Van Buren lost, he still got about 10% of the popular vote. And an interesting point from this election that the map doesn't show is that 13 other Free Soil candidates won seats in Congress. And this election was proof that slavery wasn't just a Southern issue, but it was a national issue, and it was not going to go away anytime soon. Oh, and just wait until we start talking about the presidency of Zachary Taylor and then Millard Fillmore, because it will start to get really, really interesting with those two. Which brings us to our favorite part of the day, our assignment. Now, there is no written assignment for this lesson, but I advise you to go back and read through the text and review this lesson to prepare, especially for tomorrow's lesson, and then for the quiz that will be following that one. And in tomorrow's lesson, we're going to learn more about the increasing tension in the country over this issue of slavery.